Today, here on our main segment on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to begin a look at Daggerheart, the new role playing game from Darrington Press. We are going to start by looking at the basic rules and the initiative system, since those two things are the main differences that you might see from games like Dungeons and Dragons. Uh, so we were going to just talk about the initiative system, but you really need to understand the basic rules to
Mm.
understand why the initiative system is what it is and why it can do what it does. Uh, we both played Daggerheart as a playtest,
Hmm.
and then 2 weeks ago, Teos and I played it with Tom Christie and his D20 play game. And then last week, I wasn't there, but I assume, Teos, that you
Yep,
finished the game.
I
Okay.
did.
So, overall, how do you want to frame this discussion?
Well, I guess the way I would start is the reactions that people are having to this, which ties into what we did in our news segment and talked about in that great question we had from a listener and the big news, which is that folks struggle with the initiative system. And Tom Christie, who ran the games you talked about, he had this excellent poll that he put together, just a quick, simple poll saying, hey, what do you think of this initiative system? And it was interesting. I haven't looked at the latest stats, but at the time I looked at it, it was 25% saying I like them because, 46 saying I dislike them because, 10% take it or leave it, and then 19% saying what is Daggerheart. Now that was a relatively small pool of folks at the time, 50 people or so.
Mhm.
But I think that this is really comes to the fact that the initiative system is something people have to figure out. And certainly on the D20 Play channel, we were talking about this. And after our game, we were talking about this, that did we like this? Did we, what does it take to get used to this very different system? Because it is a lot more like Powered by the Apocalypse than D&D.
Yeah. And like I said, part of this is being used to playing a game with a very strict initiative system of everyone gets a turn
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same order every round. And the game not only demands that, but it integrates it into its own system where something can happen at the start of the round or end at the end of your next turn. So messing with that system messes with the mechanics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, D&D has a very fair system for all players to take turns, and we decide the order based on your initiative score, based on your dexterity, possibly juiced up if you cared about that, to add some feat or something like that, depending on your edition. Um, and then your monsters all get one turn as well. And
Mhm.
it's a reliable, in most editions you are doing the same initiative. Most recent editions you're doing the same initiative over and over again, so that combat plays out in that nice order, so everybody gets that turn. And that's part of the fun of it, is knowing, okay, Shawn took their turn, I will go next, and then the monsters are going to go. And so that's part of your strategy, your thought process, and we're all
Mhm.
just so used to that if we play D&D.
Yeah. And it's not only right, not only is it fun and fair, it's the so used to it part. When I made Peril in Pinebrook, we wanted to make it so it ran super fast
Mm.
with brand new players and a brand new
Yeah.
DM. So in the game, it says game master, start with the player on your left, let all the players take a turn, then the monsters take a turn. And I had people who were, experienced dungeon masters saying, no, initiative is part of the game. So I
Yeah.
had them roll initiative as if that simple change of just let everyone
Going
go and then
around.
you
Yeah.
go, which still does the same thing. You're just not doing it randomly,
Mm-hmm.
was off putting to people. So that's the sort of ingrained
Yeah.
muscle
Yeah.
memory sort of thing that we're dealing with when we try to change that sort of system in a different game.
Yeah. So let's talk about how Daggerheart works. And I think then after that, talk about what that does to the game, and why Daggerheart chose to change this up.
Mhm. So the flow of the game is really, and I'm going section by section in the
Yeah.
running and adventure. So they talk about the flow of the game, and if you've played D&D or any other game, this is generally what you see when the game is described. It's the game master will set up a situation and describe it. The players and the game masters will ask questions of each other until everyone has a firm understanding of what the situation and the environment is. Then the game master will use those four magic words. What do you do?
Uh-huh.
Then the players and the players may ask more questions. Oh, I have to do something. All right, let that helps people focus. Oh, I have to do something. Let me ask some more questions, and then the game master will answer. Maybe ask some questions of their own, and then, if necessary, there is a roll to determine if the actions that the players have decided to take succeed or fail or somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
Once that is resolved, there is a change of state. The game state changes. The outcome is decided and narrated, and then the scene is redescribed based on the new information. So that section, nothing really outstandingly, revolutionary there,
Yeah, yeah. At that highest level, it
right?
all sounds very similar. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Then the core mechanics section comes in, and we start to see a little play within this system. So they don't talk about turns.
No.
They talk about the spotlight.
And even
Any
rounds, right? Like, which
right,
is
right. Yeah. They don't really talk about turns or rounds. They talk about the spotlight. Anytime a character becomes the focus of a scene, they're in the spotlight. And right away, my game design slash instruction manual brain started flashing warning signs because it's the word of,
mm.
right? And so you're like, who cares about the word of? It's a little preposition. But for me, this sentence, anytime a character becomes a focus of a scene,
Mm.
for me, that means they are the focus
Mm-hmm.
of that scene. What I would say is anytime a character becomes the focus within a scene,
Mm-hmm.
so when it is their focus within the scene, not a focus of the scene,
Mm-hmm.
because there are games out there, believe it or not, where you will go and you will be like, okay, we're in a new encounter, and I am the focus of this encounter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Other people participate, but this
But it's
is
mine.
my scene.
Mm-hmm.
So right there, if you are not uh, fluent with these things, you may say, wait a second, so a specific character is the focus of a scene? No, but they do have a spotlight shined on them while the scene takes place.
Though I will say
Uh,
that is an interesting focus point because Daggerheart comes close to where that is true. I think I agree with you in that I think what they really mean is within the scene. But I
mhm,
think if you look at Critical Role shows and how they operate, they welcome that potential that this could become just your scene. Whereas in D&D, that kind of isn't meant to happen ever. Oh, you might say that, wow, the paladin really shone in that one combat, but that's happenstance, not because we shone a spotlight on it. And I think, it's interesting watching them play because it is kind of like, oh, that character really dominated the scene, and it's not through mechanics, but it's through the drama of it, the number, which led to the number of actions they took, and the
mhm,
scene
mhm.
can often end up revolving around, let's say, a subset of the players rather than all of them. So it's an almost here. It's it's almost of
and,
instead of within.
and then I would say, then make a rule
Mm.
that says this is Jonathan's scene. And we know this because story wise, it's going to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we know it mechanically because everything Jonathan does in this scene, he gets to, or she gets to add a d6 to their roll,
Yeah.
right? That reinforces it narratively and it reinforces it
Mm.
mechanically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, But if you are playing a game where there's a lot of combat, then it becomes harder to make it just Jonathan's scene.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so, right off the bat, right, Teos and I are like trying to parse
Yeah.
what this means in the rules, what it means to the designers to play it, what it's supposed to mean to game masters
Hmm.
to run players through it. Uh, it's hazy. Uh, so for me, the spotlight is when it's your turn. To Teos, it's the spotlight might mean something more.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well,
so we get
and I
that
think,
spotlight.
D&D has its rules, and then it has the emerging social conventions, right? And that is something that has happened from the early days of the game in OD&D, where people would interpret the game, right? Lee Gold, various people would just say, "Here's what I think is how you play," and people would go,
Mhm.
"Oh, that's how I play," and you
Yep.
build this up. And I think one of the reasons why people struggle with Daggerheart Initiative is you haven't seen enough of it to collectively decide how these rules should work, maybe even
Mhm.
beyond how you collectively adopt these rules. And that's what I particularly love about this topic of this initiative.
Right. Yeah, so much to talk about, but I'm gonna
Yeah,
stay focused here.
stay focused.
So on your turn is the next section. So it says on your turn, you can make a move. Then it specifically goes into moves that you take in combat,
Hmm.
and then it talks about game master moves and adversary actions. And this is the brunt of what we're talking about when we talk about the initiative. So I want to skip this, talk about the dice, talk about hope and fear, then come back to this
Cool.
where we can really dive into what it means for taking turns and sharing spotlight in this game. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So instead of rolling a 20-sided die like you would for a Dungeons and Dragons game,
Hmm.
this game has what they call duality dice. So instead of rolling that 20-sider, you roll two d12, so two 12-siders. And you're going to add those two together to get a number that you can add your modifiers to see if you succeed on a task.
Hmm.
The reason there are two dice is for reasons of math. There's
Math.
a bell curve.
Hmm.
So you're more likely to get a number closer to 13
Hmm.
than the number be spread out between 1 and 20.
And that
But the
means
two
it's way
dice,
more stable than the D20, right? The D20 has an equal 5% chance of generating one, a 20, or a 13. Here we're
yeah,
saying we're going to have very few twos, very few 24s. We're going to have a lot more 13s. And
yep,
that's a big change to how things work.
yep, for sure. And these are called duality dice because there are two different kinds of dice. They are 12-sided dice, but one is considered the hope die and one is considered the fear die. And I spelled it wrong, so I'm going to fix it. Uh, so if you roll these two 12-siders and your hope die is higher than your fear die, you gain a resource called hope.
Hmm.
If your fear die is higher than your hope die, the game master gains a resource called fear, and it allows them to interrupt the action by taking some move of their own.
Yeah. And I should say, interrupt the action for free
Yep.
versus spending fear to act, which they could also do if they felt they needed to.
Yep.
And this is one of the very interesting things of the game. I'm just going to say that what the GM does will also, I think, require sort of social convention and every GM playing enough to sort of find out, should you always act when you have the option to do so? So, how often should you interrupt flow things with fear? This is all things that I think I'm going to have to see a lot more games to figure out. The rules do not dictate a way of. They have a standard way of operating, which is exactly what you stated. Someone rolls with fear. Now the GM takes a turn, but there's very little to really say. How often should you do that, and so on.
Mhm. The 2d12 are then added together. Any modifiers are added. If you have advantage, you get to roll, or whoever gives you advantage gets to roll a 6-sided die
Mm-hmm.
and add that number to the 2d12 plus your modifier. If you have multiple instances of advantage, they all count if they come from a different source. Everyone rolls that, but you only take the highest instance of advantage to add
Right.
to the roll plus your modifier. So you get a final number. You compare that to I forgot what the exact term is. Uh, it's not DC, it's not difficulty class, but yeah, you compare it to the target number. If you meet or succeed the target number, the action succeeds. If you get lower than the target number, the action fails. And because it fails, the game master again can act.
Yep.
The When the game master gets to act, whatever they're running, whether it's a monster or a situation, will generally have a list of options that they can do. Sometimes it's just a standard attack with a monster. Sometimes there may be something in the monster that allows them to use the fear to boost that attack or take a special attack or do something that's not in the standard list of game master moves. Am I
Yeah.
pretty good so far, Teos?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the standard
By the
things a
way,
game master can
I'll
do.
add that the term is the difficulty.
Difficulty. So
I
not
found it.
difficulty class, just
A
difficulty.
difficulty. Mm-hmm.
I will call it target number because that's
Yeah.
where my brain is
Uh-huh.
right at the moment. So the game master, uh, if the player rolls with fear, if they fail with their action, or if the game master spends fear in order to interrupt, they can generally do these things with an adversary, with a monster. They can move to within close range and make a standard attack. They can, if they're within close range, they can move and make a standard attack. They can move if they're within close range and use an adversary action, which is one of those extra special things I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
They can clear a condition. So, think of the conditions of D&D, something similar to that. They can clear that from a creature, or they can sprint from within far or very far range on the battlefield. So they can get closer to you.
Yeah. And I believe they do that without making a check, unlike characters.
Correct. They can do that without making a check. So those are the standard things a game master can do. But again, they only do that if they have a fear to spend, if a player rolls with fear, or if a monster, or if the player fails with a check.
And you and I have seen various ways this can play out across our games. The game we played together 2 weekends ago, back when you played with a ton of, I think you got a ton of hope in a row. When you were playtesting, I had a playtest game where we had endless fear and missing. And so it really can change the dramatic feeling of the scene and the flow of the scene based on what's happening. And what's important to keep in mind is that this roll of the duality dice can happen for a lot of reasons. For example, I can choose my character. I could say that my character wants to do the following. So it becomes my turn, and who's going to go? Oh, I'll go. And I say my rogue would like to move. So they get to move a certain number of squares or a close range worth of movement, roughly 30 feet. And I'm going to cast a spell. This is what I might have in my mind. I'm going to cast a spell. Then I'm going to move closer, which requires a roll, and I'm going to stab someone. Like I might want to do all of that. In D&D, you'd say, well, great, that's 3 turns. What are you talking about? Stop.
Yeah.
But here in Daggerheart, I can say that that's what I'm going to do, and I can start doing these things and begin narrating and do the things. And so I move. Okay, no problem. I cast the spell, and maybe I roll with fear. So my spell goes off, but now the DM interrupts all of my plans, right? Mm-hmm. And the DM might now have their monster do something that impacts play such that I no longer want to do those other things I'd planned. So even when they finally return to me or somebody else, I may say, you know what? No, who else wants to go? And I find that really interesting. In fact, we've had turns in play where the first thing you do is move, fail to move. Well, you move, but you generate, you either fail to move or you generate fear with it,
Mhm.
and you don't get to do what you planned because now the game goes. Other things that can happen, I might use a spell to stun an enemy, but I did it with fear. And technically, the GM could immediately then decide to use that fear to end that stun that I did.
Mhm.
So it has virtually no impact at all. Now, I think the book actually says, consider not doing that, but that's a thing, right? That you actually can do, and so your conditions actually end up lasting far less often than they would in D&D. Even if the DM lets them have impact for a little bit of time, they usually get cleared pretty
Mhm.
quickly because it's worth their monsters doing so.
And what you just said is like the most important thing, which is the book says maybe don't do this, maybe don't do that, but the rules allow you to.
Mm-hmm.
And I got, I got, we got a message on our message board that I don't want to read it word for word, but I also don't want to misquote it.
Mm-hmm.
But it said something like, "You D&D players or Pathfinder players will never understand games like this because the rules don't matter." And that's what the email said. The rules don't matter. It's about the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted so much to find some depth, some profundity in that,
Mm-hmm.
but really it's just flat out wrong because games have rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's what games are.
Yeah.
And that's why RPGs and storytelling games are so fraught with this, because the rules tell you one thing, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Advice could tell you something else, but if the rules don't model the advice,
Yeah.
you just end up with trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trouble that you could get around, but still trouble in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
It's like carving a beautiful statue with a chainsaw,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are people that can do it and do it really well, but that's not what chainsaws are meant for.
And true. It's more of a spectacle. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
would say, fourth edition ran into problems where its rules didn't properly set up how play could be, right? The
Yep.
difference between 2014 and 2024 5e, if they both are popular for long enough and 2024 is popular for long enough, 2024 will necessarily lead to different approaches in play because it's a different rules engine, right?
Yep.
And it declares different types of actions and interactions as a result of all that that will change the nature of play at the table.
Mhm.
And so here again, I absolutely agree with you. Rules absolutely matter, even when they're very open, because
Yep.
they're very open or because they aren't, right? That is what the
Right.
rule does. And people will grab these rules and do certain things with them, and it'll take that collective learning to
Mhm.
figure out, right?
Yeah. If yes, if that's what people want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of AD&D was how bad the rules were. And I don't mean bad in terms of not fun. I don't mean bad in terms of not creative, but just bad in terms of as tools to use to run a game, they were not tight. They
Mm-hmm.
were not, they did not flow well. They did not work with each other even very
Right.
well.
Right. Right.
And so I loved that game and still do, but it, what, what was best about that system was that there wasn't a consensus on how to use it. So you did whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Consensus is great uh, when everyone has the same needs. But what we're going to see is either A, people just jettison the game,
Mhm.
or a loud enough consensus is made about doing it this way
Mm.
that people that would otherwise like the game by playing it a different way will feel like they can't play it a different way. The consensus, if it's vocal enough and widespread enough, which maybe we're still a niche enough hobby that it won't, but would tend to dampen the creativity rather than, you know, enjoy it or expand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of observations watching Critical Role play their Age of Umbria campaign. I watched a couple of episodes and then I listened to someone talking about the other episode that I haven't watched, and they actually wrote down all of the actions each player did to sort of analyze
Mhm.
how, is what Critical Role does different than what we've done in our games, and how does it compare? And they found, no, it's really interesting. You look at this episode, and this one player is taking the vast majority of the options, or many more options than other players, and this
Mhm.
one player is taking just a couple of options, doing very, very little. And so this is an impact on play, right? Whereas in a Critical Role game that uses 5e, you've necessarily see just about the same number of, depending on when
Mhm.
initiative starts and ends, you see everybody take an equal number of options and get the spotlight an equal number of times, though they may do different things with the spotlight. In this game, Daggerheart, you can end up with that big difference, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think when we played, we found that my rogue was very effective. It's very accurate, does a
Mhm.
lot of damage. So it's really hard to say, gee, why shouldn't my rogue take another attack if what we want to do is kill this enemy?
Mhm. Right.
Right? And that is an impact on play too, where you go, well, it should really be this person to kind of murderize the foe, because boy, that's the solution to this problem. But someone else has a more fun thing, but maybe it's a lot less accurate. And just even things
Mhm.
like the order of my turn, right? Where I'm a little worried, I want to say fear, that if
Mhm.
I try to move all the way to the enemy, that action could fail because it's not my best roll. And
Mhm.
therefore, I don't get to attack. The monster goes, the monster deals a bunch of damage to us, or
Mhm.
the clock goes down, or whatever, right? But if I can keep
Right.
the momentum, if I can keep the spotlight on myself by doing something that's easy, or maybe use a domain card that has no check at all, well, that's absolutely worth doing, because I won't threaten switching to the DM, generating fear or failing. And that is an
Right.
impact on play that I think also will have to work out over time, because the rules as written don't, you know, they leave that open, right?
Yeah. And they do offer this three token system,
Mm-hmm.
which allows you, or if your players are of the type where everyone wants an equal number of actions, you can give each of them three tokens. And one person could play all three tokens all at once.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of those three tokens, everyone needs to take three different actions. I believe that's the summary of it. Am
Yep.
I
Yep.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
And I could see this being very popular with the used to a fantasy role-playing game with
Sure.
initiative order, uh, because that then does allow you to sort of keep track and keep things quote unquote fair.
Yeah.
Uh,
It has its own issues. And they say, three is our recommendation, but you can do more or less or whatever. Three sounds like a lot to maybe the average D&D player. But what's interesting is, it's three until everybody has spent theirs. And so this
mhm.
means that if I choose to have my rogue do a bunch of things, all three
Yeah.
tokens,
Yep.
and then everybody must use all theirs before, say, I can deal with the trap that was just revealed.
Yeah.
But folks might want to, we really want you to deal with that trap that just showed up.
Right.
I spent all my tokens. It's
Yeah.
it creates its
Yeah.
own
It
issues with
it it
flow.
it certainly does, and that then becomes a game in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Of maybe I should hang on to one token in case something important comes up. Oh, that person's dying over there. I need to get over to
Yeah.
heal them. Oh, but I don't have any tokens. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and again, if you want a super narrative game, you can move in that direction with
Mm.
Daggerheart,
Mm-hmm.
but it is still very mechanical.
Yeah.
It is still a heavily, heavily mechanical game that, like every game where there's this tension between rules and story, gets in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you want to be able to tell a story without having rules, then tell a story without the rules.
Yeah. Well,
And the
yeah.
rules, people always say about these games, oh, the rules are just there to guide you and you can do anything you want. But then you're not playing the game if you don't follow the rules.
Yeah.
Which, if you're playing off on your own with your own group, great.
Right.
Do whatever you want. But we're not looking at just this one group, right? We're looking at the game and the hobby
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah, and I think that's a big discussion point that we're all going through as well. A lot of folks talking about how, well, the point is it's this super narrative system, or I don't like it because it's a super narrative system. And the answer, as you said, is yes or no. Yes and no. Both are can be true depending on what you want to do with it. And the game as written does not impose that you make this your spotlight, receiving your spotlight, a big dramatic thing.
Mhm.
It does not require that. It's not baked in, but it is presented there and clearly encouraged that you can do so. And there are very nice examples of play which further show how much this varies from typical D&D play. Like, for example, there is a scene where a character has stolen something from a noble, has to scramble up onto a rooftop and run away from some guards. And
Mhm.
multiple parts of that example of play are different than any D&D scenario where you would have to make a climb check. But here, no, you're good at that. You know what? You just get up there onto the roof. But make me a check for, well, actually, I'll give you the option of making a check to run
Mhm.
across this gap, jump this gap. But know that if you fail, it'll have a big dramatic impact. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Well, I'll try to make the check. Oh, you made it. You leave everybody behind.
Mhm.
Like it can be that way, right? and
Right.
and
Right.
those, so it takes that kind of reading this a lot of times, and I think play to figure that out, that you're not just D&D-ifying this. You can be far more narrative
Mhm.
to alter, and this is the part the game I think doesn't do enough to talk about to us, to say moves and the scene also aren't operating on a 6 segment or 10
Mhm.
second,
Right.
segment. It's not working on these units of time measure. They are all fairly malleable.
Mhm.
So I can decide to move out of what you would have think would be a big deal down in the market square where you pickpocket this person, go straight to rooftops.
Mhm.
And then from there to you're safe, or not, or I can make it a big, there's
Yeah.
a lot of flexibility, so you can be highly narrative and play, and especially if the players choose to be narrative on their end and talk about what they're doing and their objectives and things they're thinking about. Well, that can all lead to ways you spend the fear as a GM and create a very interesting story if you're
Mhm.
all up for that, because the rules, the mechanics
Yeah,
themselves aren't necessarily driving that, though they facilitate it, I think.
for sure. I don't have too much else to
Good.
add. Anything else you want to say before we sail off into the wild blue yonder here?
No, I think that's it. I find this to be one of the fascinating parts of the game, but not the only one. So I look forward to chatting more about the other aspects of the game for sure.
Awesome. Well, then I want to say thank you, everyone out there, for listening. And you can join us not just to listen, but to actually support by going to patreon.com/mastering D&D and becoming a supporter. We have different tiers like the Master Dungeon supporters. Thank you. We have in our show notes the Master of Realm supporters, and the Masters of the Multiverse get a shout out right now. Agile Monk of Fantasy Campaign Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Louis Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiensen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Brobo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at NerdRockNomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, William Harshman of Runeforge Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, the Jaunty Mantis TTRPG podcast. Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd. JL at Tileforge. JR of the Twilight Perspective. JT Evans. Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Sean Malley, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson from the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from Page, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Printer from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Samonsa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunor Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from D&D and TV podcast, Tres, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Wasiak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you so much for your support. We really do appreciate it. You can also help us out by leaving us a review wherever you listen to the show, or go to YouTube and subscribe, like, and do all the stuff there. Teos, where can people find all your exciting content?
Find me at alphastream.org. I'll have a video this week looking at that demiplane integration that exists for Daggerheart, which is pretty darn sweet.
It is spiffy. You can find me on the socials at Shawn Merwin, or you can find Mastering Dungeons at Mastering D&D on all the socials. And again, you can always visit our Patreon, or you can go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@masteringdungeons. So, Teos, we have started our swim through the Daggerheart waters. What are we going to do now?
Clearly, we're going to move to Southern California and join Critical Role.
I am not going to do either of those. Shawn out.